Hello, salutations, what it do? It's the Dr. Gamer back at you with another Marvel's Avengers video. I finally did it after not a lot of sleep. I grinded out my first Black Panther build, and while I'm still looking for some pieces, I still want to explore more of exotics. I feel confident this is the pretty close to optimal way of playing the melee version of Black Panther, and I've built him accordingly. This is the build I originally said I was going to make when I learned about Black Panther's moves, some valor, some melee, some might for the melee rating. I had more heroic rating, but I found through some testing that I rather have the extra might than the extra valor. It comes up more often, at least for what I'm doing. So if you've seen my build videos before, you know I'm going to show off some gameplay, but first I'll walk you through the skills and the gear, and then that show you some more gameplay, and that is going to be how this works. So first, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. We already passed our 4K sub goal. Thank you so much. And the next step is 5K. Now, if we hit 5K subs, our moderator Ty Versal has agreed to eat crickets on stream. So definitely subscribe if you want to witness the moderator, or as we call him, the mod of thunder, eating some crickets. All right, now without further ado, let's jump right into this video. So these are the skills that are going to be pretty relevant. So with the melee build, the interesting about this build is that it pretty much does everything. I have it so that it has crazy survivability. You're constantly getting your heroics back. You're constantly getting intrinsic energy, and you can also wreck enemies with the range. So what you want to do with this build is not neglect the range. So you're going to want to take advantage of devastating daggers. Devastating daggers, when you just hold L2 and do your regular throw, each dagger that you throw, as you see, will trigger a debuff that will increase melee damage taken for the target by 3%, and you can stack this buff 3 times, so that is a total of 9%. You can also equip a skill on his mastery tree that gives you an extra debuff, so you can get up to 12%, which is definitely very good. Now, if you want this debuff, you have to make sure that you're just throwing it once, not using the combo version of this, which is also good. Now, when you're doing this, there is a combo version of this for Relentless Daggers, where you can just let a series of daggers fly into a combo finisher. And I use this a lot because of my gear piece that you'll see later on. And the Campinga daggers, which are great because there's a lot of blocking in this game. I don't like this mechanic that Crystal Dynamics added. There are a lot of enemies that can block without actually blocking. They have like a passive shield, and this, as you'll see, can help you pierce through targets, and it actually seeks them out, which is very cool. This is the range power attack. And the other important part about Black Panther is, of course, his defensive ability. Now parrying, blocking, most people for every other build don't use it at all, but for Black Panther, they really incentivize you to do it, and it is actually very important in this build. So holding R2 puts the cowl up, which is essentially the block. You're going to want to use this block to generate intrinsic energy, because Black Panther's base intrinsic energy is not very high because of his abilities. So to fill it up, you're going to need to be able to block and parry consistently. And there is a very cheap way to fill up your intrinsic by using the Panther cowl. If you run into a turret that has a laser, all you have to do is stand in front of it, hold R2, and let the laser wash over you. It will not do any damage, and it will fill up your intrinsic all the way so that you can overcharge, and of course let off the concussive blast, which you remember from the Black Panther movie, I'm sure. When your intrinsic meter is full, you just double tap R2, triggers a burst of kinetic energy, knocks away nearby enemies, and increases your damage by 10% for 10 seconds, which is quite good. Black Panther also has a gear piece that allows you to keep this up. It is his exotic, and you can get this pretty much all the time. It's very good. Now over to his heroic side. So his support heroic are the Kamoyo beads. So I like this functionality. It has two basic uses. So if you just press L1 like normal, it throws out the Kamoyo beads, and it just seeks out your enemies and deals a large burst of stun damage, and it reduces the target's impact resistance so that they're easier to interrupt. This means that they're not going to just be able to as easily ignore your pounce or your melee or anything like that, and they'll be more vulnerable to takedowns because of the high stun. But if you hold the recovery bead, the recovery beads come out if you hold L1, and it will seek out heroes and provide you willpower over time. So if you're not particularly worried about your health, you can just tap this. But if you're low on health for some reason and you need some recovery, just hold L1. But if you do hold L1, I have the Kamoyo Blast, which lets you have some actual offensive capabilities with the healing version of the support heroic. So while you'll still get the healing over time, they'll actually attack and stagger enemies, so you don't completely lose out on that effect if you opt for the healing. Alternatively, you can go for the Kamoyo armor, which gives you 20% armor on top of the healing, so it does a 20% reduction in damage. And over here I have shadow physics, extends duration of Kamoyo beads that target enemies by 10 seconds, and the recovery beads for allies by 10 seconds. I think that's quite good. I wasn't particularly impressed with the other ones, missiles and bombs, because I'm not worried about intercepting projectiles. For the assault heroic, this is the spear throw, King's Mercy. When you press it, he throws a vibranium spear. You can pin up to 3 enemy targets if they are relatively close together and they're in the path, and they will pin them just like Thor with his Mjolnir. It's just very fun. So you can either do immovable object, which causes the spear to pulse, and it will deal 30% of its base damage over time to all targets, and also it will apply damage to the targets that weren't pinned. Didn't like it that much. Meteoric Impact is the AoE version of this. You just throw it, does a lot of damage, and instead of pinning, it just does a lot of AoE damage. I prefer No More Mercy, and the alternative to this is you're not getting the impact explosion, but you are still pinning targets, and you get 3 charges of it instead of the 1, which I prefer because it's very good for interrupting enemies, and it's good for getting out of trouble. Similar to Black Widow's taser bite, that's pretty much how I use this. So as an example, if you're worried about enemy about to attack you can't block or whatever have you. Hold it, and then you can cancel it by double tapping circle, so you don't lose your charge and you don't take any damage, because when you're activating your heroics you don't take any damage, so you're invulnerable here. And then if you don't want to use it, you can just dodge to get out of it. So that's how I use Black Widow, and I think this is very convenient as a way to just kind of reset. You know, maybe you line up a target and you don't have a good aim on it and you don't want to waste a throw, so you can just dodge out of it. So I like having multiple charges at the ready, so I can either use it to pin a annoying enemy or quickly just get out of trouble. So I find that to be pretty convenient. Now, over on the ultimate side, he has the ability to block attacks and parry attacks that are red, which are unblockable. So when in doubt, if you're not good at parrying, pop the ultimate and just hold R2, and you can essentially just not take any damage. It's pretty wild, especially since you're constantly generating intrinsic energy with the empowerment. So yeah, just hold it, block, and go wild. It's pretty awesome. I went with Panther's Roar, and when it triggers, it debuffs nearby enemies, increasing their damage taken from all sources by 10% and reducing the damage of all their attacks by 15%. Alternatively, you can go for King of Necropolis, which revives nearby allies, restores their willpower. You can also use this when you're already down, so you can self-revive. I don't particularly use this, but maybe if you're, I don't know, doing the Omega level threat and you're worried about the super adaptoid, you can use King of Necropolis and you can revive yourself and your team even if you yourself already down. That could be pretty cool. The other one are Adored Ones, which lets you summon the two Dora Milaje to fight alongside you. It's pretty cool, but I haven't found it that useful, but I have to test it out a little more. Maybe if I throw more valor at it, it'll be more effective, but so far it wasn't really doing what I wanted to do, and I prefer just to have the debuff. Over here, Ancestral Memory. While the ultimate heroic is active, the kinetic burst from the percussive blast is supercharged, dealing additional damage and making it a heroic attack, which means the more value you have, the more damage that percussive blast is going to do while your ultimate is active. These other ones aren't really that interesting. You can increase the nearby intrinsic energy of your teammates, and this one, Realm Shift, lets you essentially teleport to your enemies like Kate Bishop. It's kind of cool, but I don't know, a little gimmicky. I have to test it more. It is pretty neat when you're pulling it off, but I'd say you can go either one of these. This one pretty much trash unless you're on a full squad of Black Panthers, in which case you can just pop your ultimate and just load up their intrinsics, which can be pretty neat. Over on the mastery side, I have Reach the Stars, increase attack damage by 10% while performing melee combos. Pretty self-explanatory. You can also increase the impact of signature attacks. Not that good. And you can increase the critical attack chance of all light combo finishers. I think that's a bit situational. I mostly use heavy stuff. And over here, I have Pouncing Fury, increase the damage of all pounce attacks by 10%. The pounce is your heavy power attack, where you pounce on enemies and you can claw them up. And it's pretty cool, especially if you have the gear piece that I'm going to show you. So I just want to do a little more damage to that. And of course, Heroic Spirit, you should have this checked off for all your heroes. Form a takedown, grants a heroic orb, no brainer, don't even think about it. Over on the range side, seeking surprise, swap out the dagger thrown in the range combo finisher with the Compringa dagger. This is the one that breaks blocks and seeks out targets, so that when I'm doing that dagger throw combo, I can actually break through blocks as well without doing a ranged power attack. Alternatively, you can do Final Flourish, which lets you stack the devastating dagger debuff an extra time, giving you a total of 12% max. And here we have Armor Piercing, increase the effect of the devastating dagger debuff by 30% and the duration that each of the daggers remains in the target by 3 seconds. This is crazy. This is very similar to effect that Kate Bishop has on one of her gear pieces when she debuffs, but I don't think it's quite as powerful, but it's based on the phrasing, sounds pretty close. And you do a lot of damage if you're doing the debuffs, and you should once again utilize it, the dagger throws, before just charging headfirst into combat, for obviously for the debuffs, but also for gear perks that I'll show you later on. And Panther's challenge, increase the critical attack damage dealt from all the daggers by 10%. This is the best of the options that I saw, and I like critical damage, especially since I have a decent heroic rating. Over the intrinsic side, kinetic absorption, build up a small amount of intrinsic energy on each successful melee attack. This is a melee build, focused a lot on intrinsic, so seemed like a no-brainer. Just keep doing your melee and you're just constantly building up intrinsic energy. The alternatives, you can give yourself some armor based on the amount of intrinsic energy you have, up to 10%, but it's kind of useless because if you're using your Panther armor correctly with your R2, you're already pretty armored up, not taking really any damage. So this is pretty extra, not very useful. And you can reduce the cost of all intrinsic attacks by 15%. I do use a lot of intrinsic attacks, so you could use this, but the way the build is set up now, you're not really often at a loss for intrinsic energy anyway, so I prefer to build this up with all my successful melee attacks. Here we got Eternal Drum, increase the amount of intrinsic energy gained from blocking and parrying attacks by 20%. This is quite good. The alternatives, Last Panther Standing, increase the base intrinsic by another 5%. I don't think it's necessary because with all the reasons that I outlined before, I can build up the intrinsic meter pretty consistently, and you can increase the damage of all intrinsic attacks by 10%. That's a viable option if you do a lot of intrinsic attacks. I prefer to just have the increase for the block and parrying because you do a lot of it. And of course, Speed of Sound, increase the damage dealt by all heavy intrinsic attacks by 10%. Reason why I do this, another reason, is because I use the heavy intrinsic more often, so I'd rather take the 10% here and take the extra 20% on my intrinsic gained. Over on the overcharge, you can increase the damage of the kinetic burst by 15%. You can alternatively make it do more stun damage. It's up to you. This one, increase the range, and it taunts. Black Panther, so far I haven't seen any gear that takes advantage of taunting, so don't see the value in that. So I'd say either go for the stun so you can get takedowns more easily, because this build does do a lot of takedowns, or just go for the extra damage. It's up to you. Now over here, Cool Vibrations, increase the critical attack chance by 10% and critical attack damage by 10% during the overcharge buff. This is of course when your meter fills up and you do the explosion. I prefer that over the willpower recovery and restoring 5% of intrinsic energy. I feel like when in doubt, go for more damage. And over here, Vibranium Mastery. Defeating an enemy while the overcharge buff is active has a 20% chance to drop an intrinsic orb. Tougher enemies have a higher chance of triggering the effect. The other option gives you a 10% chance to drop heroic orbs. You could go for that as well. But I already get my heroics back a lot, so I don't really need this, and 10% isn't very high. So I prefer to have the extra chance for the intrinsics. Now, over on the champion system, as far as I know, the champion system still isn't fully functional. I have to check and see if anyone's tested it since, but in the meantime, I still prefer the ones that I do know that work, which is critical damage, critical a chance boost, heroic charge rate, and perk chance boost. Those are the ones that so far have been proven to be the most effective, and they do help your builds. So if you get some champion points, start allocating them on these slots first. Now, over to the actual gear. And first I'll show the stats. So you see I have decent might, 297 might, 44 precision, 102 proficiency, 155 valor, 114 resolve, 45 resilience, 98 intensity. And you see I have pretty decent charge rates for my heroics, 23% for ultimate and 15.3% for assault and support. So like I said, this is a melee build, also focused on some valor, but I also have a lot of success with range, and Black Panther could have a viable range build. His daggers are quite good, especially when you spec them out and have the right gear around them, but I don't think the range build is going to be, on the level of like a Hawkeye. I think his range works best when it's combined with his melee, but that's why I keep a bit of range here. 1100, that's fine. So for the first gear piece, we've got the lightweight invulnerability clause. I was mainly looking for a perk that lets me get in a cold status on power attacks. So you see I got power attacks inflict cryo damage, and your power attacks are your pounce attacks. So when you pounce, all your attacks when you pounce are going to apply cryo damage or whatever status you have here. This is how Black Panther can do the battery effect. He can also do it with heavy combo finishers or light combo finishers if you have gear that does that as well. But if you're using the pounce a lot, this is a great perk to have. I'm looking for one with Sonic. I'm looking for a particular piece and I'm still digging for it, but I have it, but I want better stats. You see I have pretty much the stat layout that I wanted. You got some might, you got proficiency, and you have valor. Valor not only increases your heroic damage, it also increases your critical attack damage, which is very important. And also have a bonus here, 11.9% increased damage from sprint and dodge attacks. He has very good sprint and dodge attacks, which I use a lot. Also, I have a 10.5% chance of getting an invulnerability buff by doing light combo finishers, which is also pretty good. Now here is probably my favorite piece, the targeted buff gauntlets, just because targeted buff in this game is very OP. So targeted buff, 31% chance hitting an enemy with a ranged critical attack grants a damage buff. So like I said, Black Panther naturally works by combining his range with his melee. So you throw the daggers to apply the debuff, and then you go in and do melee. Also now, when you throw the daggers, you're going to eventually get a ranged crit, and that will grant you a damage buff, which will increase your damage significantly. Damage buffs in this game are still pretty OP. So if you want to take your build to next level, definitely look for more damage buffs on your build. And you see I have particle damage on here. Range attacks with the Campinga daggers deal particle damage. So I'll be throwing the daggers and I'll be applying particle damage, which is a positive status effect. And then once I shrink them and they're filled with Pim, I can do the bounce, because cryo is a negative status effect. It will double my damage when combined with a positive status effect. So I apply particle damage with the daggers, and then I'll apply cryo with the pounce. So pretty cool combination there. It's mostly effective on larger enemies, but I think I might prefer heavy combo finishers for the burst of damage, because I can do it in like an AoE with his heavy combo finisher attack. But I'll keep testing. I'll go back and forth. Mainly I was looking for stats here, but for now definitely go with the pounce. But on bosses, like I think Abomination, I don't think you can do the pounce like that, but you can still apply it, but he'll just bounce off. So for the chest piece, I have Reactive Empowerment Protector. This one gives you a 22% chance taking damage grants you an intrinsic burst. This is, I knew immediately when I learned about Black Panther's moves that I wanted this. You're melee, you're in the mix, you're blocking, you're parrying, so you're constantly being hit. So when you get hit, there is a 22% chance that you will be gaining an intrinsic burst, which will pretty much fill up your entire intrinsic meter, which will allow you to keep doing your percussive blasts and blocking and parrying and things like that. Alternatively, you can go with a reactive buff. It does the same thing, except it gives you a damage buff. You can use this as a substitute if you don't have the targeted buff. He also has an exotic piece, which is not bad. The Battle Guard of the Ancestors. It has some decent perks. Untouchable beads. You gain recovery beads for a brief duration after defeating enemies with intrinsic attacks, or when you perfectly invading an incoming attack. So this perk is bugged. When you equip this, if you unequip it, you will actually keep the untouchable beads effect. It doesn't, from what I can tell, it doesn't work on the other perks, but it does work on untouchable beads. So if you just wanted untouchable beads, you can get this exotic. It drops from the weekly priority mission. You equip it, you take it back off, and you keep the untouchable beads. So whenever you defeat an enemy with an intrinsic attack, or if you perfect evade, you will get recovery beads, which will follow you around for a brief duration and heal you. It's pretty good. But going to keep the piece, you also have 20% increase in stun status and all normal damage of intrinsic attacks. And probably the best one after that is the percussive blast, which extends the percussive blast by 2.5 seconds every time you defeat an enemy under it. So this can go up pretty high. I saw Lejeune post a screenshot where he got his up to like 70 seconds. So if you use this, you can do your percussive blast, then you pop your ultimate, you're just tearing through enemies, and every time, the more enemies you defeat, the longer it can last. I'm not currently using this because the stats are very garbage. I don't like them. I really don't like that you still can't change your stats or your perks after a year. That's my pet peeve with the gear system in this game. The perks are getting better, definitely when it comes to Black Panther, but you still can't modify your gear in any way, which makes farming for gear pretty frustrating. And limits what you can do, because some gear pieces are also, to make matters worse, locked behind certain stats. So this, for instance, can only drop with resilience, intensity, and resolve from what I can tell. Kate Bishop had a similar thing with her chest piece. I really don't like that. So not only can you not change any of the stats of your gear, you also are just bound by these specific stats for certain gear pieces. I don't like that at all. But if you want to equip it and just take the hit to your overall stats, it's fine. Intensity is good. You know, this gives you some extra defense with resilience and resolve, but I've been doing pretty fine with the reactive empowerment instead, and I still get the beats because of the bug. And the last piece here is pretty much a filler until I find a better piece, but I really just got it for the stats. It has Valor, Resolve, and Might, but it has some decent perks. 16.3% increased damage from power attacks. That will be your pounce. 29.1% chance activating a support heroic grants a willpower burst. Doesn't really come up that not really useful at all, but it's a thing. But here we go. Here we have Berserker Spark. Successfully lands 16 attacks in rapid succession without taking any damage. Grants you a heroic charge burst for all heroics. This is actually very good. I really like this Berserker Spark, especially with a character like Black Panther. So I can very easily land 16 attacks in a row without taking any damage because of the daggers and Black Panther's very quick, agile melee. So I do this and I get a burst to my heroics, so they'll fill up a lot faster. If you wanted to actually just go full heroic spam, you can also switch out targeted buff with a targeted spark. 22% chance hitting an enemy with a ranged crit grants a heroic charge burst. So you can just have your heroics up all the time, and you can, if you want to still have the damage buff, you can replace the reactive empowerment with the reactive buff. That way you still get the damage buff. And you could also just replace this piece, find one with a Berserker buff, which lets you get a damage buff after landing 16 hits in a row. So that way you have the targeted spark here, the Berserker buff here, whatever you want to do. But the spark perk is very good, especially if your character has really good heroics. Over on the gear, over for the minor artifacts, I have the ISO 8 Cosmic Affinity. This is my favorite minor artifact in the entire game because of their reactive Cosmic Surge. 14.7% chance taking any damage grants the Cosmic Surge buff. Dealing damage while the buff is active restores a small amount of willpower and heroic energy. So you take damage. This comes up a lot. You take damage, you get the Cosmic Surge buff, and then if you keep attacking, you'll gain back willpower and heroic energy. And because Black Panther is always in the mix, hit fighting and melee range, blocking, parrying, all that stuff, you're constantly getting hit. So this buff triggers all the time. So between this and this, and the takedowns that you do, you basically always have your heroics fully charged and ready to go. It's very, very good. And here I have a red ISO 8, triple might. I also experimented with triple valor. Right now I prefer triple might. I like having the extra might. The extra valor, didn't really notice a difference. I felt it was better through testing to have the extra might. Ideally, I'd like to have a reactive empowerment here with might and valor, or get it here. Either way, I still want a little more might and higher at a higher level, but this is essentially the breakdown that I like to have. A little bit of range, decent defense, and then everything else on might and valor. definitely don't neglect intensity, because intensity lets you stun enemies faster and build up status damage faster. For the major artifact now, I went with the ring. It's a melee build. I'm doing a lot of takedowns. So when I have the ring on, increases the amount restored by all orbs by 12.4%, which includes, of course, heroic orbs. So because of the ring, every time you pick up a heroic orb, you get way more recovery from it. So collect a few heroic orbs and basically all of your heroics are fully restored. You know from my Hawk build that this is extremely toxic. You know, you just wipe out enemies, collect the orbs, and after a few orbs you're fully restored again. Alternatively, you can go for the Sacred Norn Stone. I enjoy it. It's very powerful, and this gives you extra damage. This is probably more useful if you're going into a boss fight, because you're not going to have enemies to take down, so you're not going to be generating heroic orbs. So you can switch to this and you can get the increased damage perks. So your damage buff will last 4 seconds longer. You will get a 6.2% increased critical attack chance when the damage boost is active, and you can activate the third perk, which will give you a double damage buff if you already have your targeted buff active, which, if you've seen from my Thor build, completely skyrockets your damage. So you can switch back and forth between these based on the situation. They did introduce a new exotic major artifact, which lets you summon Okoye. This is basically the Void Tech transponder for Black Panther. Instead of Pym damage increased by 30% and summoning Hang Pym, you increase vibranium damage by 30%. And you can summon Okoye, who will deal vibranium damage. It also increases the radius and damage of vibranium status effect by 20%. Now, I tested this a little bit. I so far have not been impressed by the vibranium status at all. So far, it seems like a worse version of Gamma. And from reading the status effects initially, I was just more impressed by Sonic damage and the ability to recover intrinsic and heroic by being near them. So I prefer so far Sonic, but I'll keep testing vibranium. But so far this was pretty lackluster, but I'll keep testing. Maybe someone will figure something else out with it, but so far Sonic is preferred over vibranium, and that is what I'm looking for here for the power attacks. I want Sonic here. I just need the right layout of stats. I think I have it somewhere here. Yeah, faultless buff claws. That's what I'm looking for. I just want better stats, so I need the legendary version of that. But other than that, this is the build. I like it. Black Panther is extremely fun to play. He is very powerful in his own right. He's not the strongest character in the game so far. He's not stronger than Thor, but he does some very, very cool things. His damage, his combos are very slick and fun and fluid. I love doing it. I just wish Crystal Dynamics would change up their enemy combat design a bit, because when you have a character like Black Panther, it kind of exposes the flaw by giving all the enemies passive shields, which really can interrupt the flow of combat. But Black Panther can do some crazy things. He has ridiculous survivability because of his intrinsics. I'll keep working on it, finding better and better pieces. I still haven't gotten all the Black Panther exotics, but so far they're okay. But I'll keep looking and see if there's anything broken, and if there is, I'll give you an update. But so far, this is how I plan on playing Black Panther. I really like it. Hope you do too. Now I'm going to leave you with some gameplay. Thank you once again for tuning in. I'm Sadat the Gamer, signing out.
An elite AIM team is close by and on alert. Updating your HUD. Well done. That squad member has been neutralized. Well done, Avengers. A hearty congratulations is in order.